Hello, welcome to Mike's Mets Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pashota. Happy Friday to you. And as Josh Lyman on the West Wing said, we got the big mo. We got momentum now. Let's do it. We have the New York Mets winning a critical Game 3 of a 3-game series against the Tampa Bay Rays, the best team in baseball. And the Mets just took back-to-back games from them. The first one in highly dramatic fashion, really a game the Mets should not have won at all. The third game, this is a vintage 2022 Met performance. And as it turned out, the secret sauce to the Mets winning games was actually everybody doing their jobs. Like, who would have thought? And doing it against the Rays really important. I don't know how important the Rays actually thought this game was. It was really important to the Mets, though. So big win, big series win. Tyler McGill, who has had an up and down season thus far. He was not, picked to be in the rotation, but because of injuries to Justin Verlander, found his way back into the rotation. His success spotty, really. His pitching performance was kind of up and down along the way, and he delivered in a breathtaking fashion in this game. This was not a Kodai Senga 12 strikeout performance like it was the night prior, but McGill's performance was very solid. I mean, almost boringly so. He goes 6 innings, allows 4 hits, 2 earned runs, strikes out 4 batters, only throws 79 pitches, and that was probably the biggest thing, is that McGill looked very in control. His mechanics looked cleaned up. This is the second straight start that I saw a pitcher look prepared and strong on the mound, where they didn't look like they were just kind of like falling off and rushed. And there was all these things where I was looking at Met pitchers and saying to myself, this doesn't look correct in some way. I don't really know what exactly is wrong, but they're not doing something correctly. But this is back-to-back starts this is the best team in baseball right now, the Tampa Bay Rays. And to do it against this offense, where they were able to stifle rallies, and it got kind of dicey later in the game, in the 6th, when McGill gave up the tying run, made it 2-2 in the 6th, and had a bit of a momentum going against him. He was able to get out of it with minimal issues. He probably could have pitched the 7th inning, but Showalter made the decision to pull McGill at that point, just because of his 6th inning had been not troubling, but was definitely on the way to becoming a rough start. So Showalter pulled out early and brought in the bullpen. Brooks Raley would pitch the 7th. Allowed a hit, but struck out 2 batters and looked pretty sharp in that one. Jeff Brigham would pitch a easy 8th inning and then let it go to David Robertson, who shut the door in the 9th inning after his rough performance the night prior. Comes back and looked like the Robertson that we've been seeing all season. So great all-around win. Notably, Pete Alonso hitting his 16th home run. That keeps him in the league for home runs this year. Incredible run for Pete, who is now on an amazing stretch right now. He's red hot. Homered in all 3 games of this series. Drove in 6 batters. It was a fantastic series for Pete. I love seeing that, because Pete was in a situation where he may have, kind of let his approach kind of falter, but the way he is hitting right now, he's leading the league in both home runs and RBIs, much as he was much of last year, for all year, and he looks like the Pete that we've been seeing all year. He just needs this kind of like power stretch to kind of bring him back on point, and he looks great. There was no Francisco Alvarez in this game. No no Brett Beatty. Oh, actually, no, sorry. Brett Beatty was playing. No Mark Vientos in this game either. After their huge performances the game prior, instead Eduardo Escobar would get the start, and Daniel Vogelbach would start as well. So, I'm sorry. Also, and Michael Perez would get the start at catcher. So. Perez and Escobar didn't really do much in this game. I did Vogelbach. This is sort of the situation where Met fans can kind of get frustrated with Showalter in that Showalter's big thing is combinations. He's always trying to find what is the appropriate combination of players and talent, and what is the best mix so that he can use those mixes, and he's kind of making notes for himself along the way. People get frustrated though because you're like, how many chances are you going to give Eduardo Escobar? How many chances are you going to give Michael Perez? How many chances are you going to give Daniel Vogelbach? Especially when the guys who were responsible for the huge rally are basically just told, okay, you're not going to start today, but we'll start you in the next game. It does feel a little deflating. None of the performances of those players really factored into anything, and nothing really hurt them, but it's one of those things that you just want, like, okay, like, you don't need to be starting these players at this point. Why don't you start your younger talent? And it's going to become a thing soon with Showalter and Epler, because I feel like they will. Michael Perez is not going to be there for long. We know the Mets are calling up Gary Sanchez, the former Yankees catcher, who they had signed to a minor league deal. He's been spending time in AAA. They're going to be calling him up. He should replace Michael Perez. Sharp, when he was until today, he went over 3, so that was pretty much a closeout on his time with the Mets. We know that for sure. So we'll see Gary Sanchez up. And I don't really know exactly how Tomas Nido is going to factor into this when he returns back from his injury. Same for Omar Narvaez. Gary Sanchez is obviously not going to be around for long. He's signed to a minor league contract, so my expectation is that Sanchez will be gone, designated for assignment after Nido is back. I think they feel like Nido is a better option, but I'm interested to see how Gary Sanchez plays when he has playing time, when Alvarez is not starting. If Sanchez can hit, and if Sanchez can hit, then it's going to become kind of an interesting conversation, because one thing we know is that Nido cannot hit at all. I mean, if he gets his lucky hits in every once in a while, that's great, but we know for sure that Gary Sanchez, terrific power hitter, guy who still flashed pretty good power bat, definitely cannot be a starting catcher anymore. He's just too strikeout prone. There's a lot of issues with him in terms of his hitting, but if he can come through in these rare situations when he has playing time and come through with some big hits, it's going to be an interesting conversation as to what the Mets really want from the catching position, and if they feel Francisco Alvarez can be the full-time starter rather than Alvarez mixing time in with Nido. Do they just go ahead and pull the plug on Nido and keep Sanchez in as the backup and plug in Alvarez as the full-time starter? It's definitely worth seeing. Alvarez has, by all accounts, improved dramatically behind the plate. He looks really good in terms of his pitch framing, and has a great arm behind the plate. I mean, there's a lot to like about Alvarez's growth as a catcher. I think certainly being the student to Nido's master has been particularly helpful for his growth. So it's worth watching to see if Alvarez can sort of step into the spotlight. We weren't really sure when exactly Alvarez was going to be up this year. Most assumed that it was going to be coming probably in May or maybe in June, depending on how far he had gone and how well he was performing in AAA. But the injuries to Narvaez kind of necessitated the Mets accelerating the timeline, and fortunately it didn't seem to really bother them, other than that Alvarez probably could have used a little bit more time in AAA. But he's looked sharp in the last couple of weeks. I'm excited to see from Alvarez if he is in a position where he can step into a full-time role. It most estimations was that he was going to be the full-time starting catcher by 2024. But if they had to go ahead and do it this year, then I think it's interesting. I think it's worth watching with Alvarez. The other interesting situation is with Vientos and how long they're going to keep Vientos in this sort of platoon role, and where exactly it's all going to shake out with Escobar and Beatty, because the longer that these kids are up, Beatty, Alvarez, Vientos, the more it's going to become clear that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so are not really performing the way that they should. Now, we saw Beatty take a rep in left field last night. He was pinch hit for Mark Canha, should be actually the way we said it. There is not really a clear timeline as to where exactly Beatty's going to take over at third base full time. He's been playing the majority of the time. Escobar has definitely taken the backseat to Beatty, but there is the question, because Escobar has been hot recently, and despite only going 1 for 4 tonight, he's been getting base hits and has actually been coming through in situations. Pleasant to see. We don't really know about his consistency, but he's been hitting a little bit better as of late. And the question is with what to do with Mark Canha. Mark Canha has not been playing well, and Canha seems like he's on the chopping block, because Canha was a guy that they're probably not going to take his option in the off season coming up. So Canha is playing without a net, really, so to speak, even though he does have an option. There's very little chance that the Mets are going to take him. He's just kind of a roster spot, and he hasn't really worked out the way that they thought he was. He just hasn't really hit with the level of authority, and his at-bats have just not been as good as they were expecting. He's a good player. I don't think he's bad, but he feels like trade bait. It feels like a guy that they should be looking into dealing at some point during the year. And if the Mets can find a team that's willing to part with maybe a reliever or possibly another starting pitcher, it's worth looking into dealing Canha later on the year. I've seen some trade packages floated in terms of trying to acquire maybe an offensive player to sort of fit that role. Jock Peterson of the San Francisco Giants was one option that had been floated online. Peterson's an interesting move, and it's especially interesting because Tommy Pham came up with the game-winning hit in the bottom of it was the 6th inning or 7th inning, I believe, but it was the 6th inning. So Tommy Pham came up with the critical RBI in this game, and ultimately won the game for the Mets 3-2. So how does that all play out with Pham and Peterson? Obviously, the well-known physical altercation between the two of them the year prior. So it's possibly Pham could be dealt or let go at that point. Is really no word as to when the Mets are going to start looking into trade opportunities to start hopefully improving the roster. I would say that they should be getting on it sooner than later, because you definitely don't want to lose your chance on acquiring helpful players, especially if some of your players are not really working well. It's sort of as good as this was. It was another situation where the Mets veterans are not really keeping up in terms of the everyday starters, is what I mean. And you see that with Marte, you see that with Canha, you see that with Escobar, you see it with Vogelbach. These guys are just not really performing at the way that they're supposed to be. And the result of it all is, you feel like, guys should be coming in and doing their jobs, and if you can't do your job, remove them from the pitcher. Why keep them around in this case? Pham was a guy I would have bet money that they were going to trade soon. He comes through 2 for 4. We'll see how that goes with him. Jeff McNeil was in a big game for him, 2 for 4. Came up some critical base hits the day prior and kept it going in this game. And you see you can sort of see the writing on the walls that Vogelbach and Escobar and Canha. These are guys that are going to be sticking around for very much longer. They just are not playing well enough to cede starting time to them. It's just impossible to sort of make that sort of limitation on the offense and limitation on the entire roster as a whole. You can't have those guys, and they're just taking up space. It's a bad idea, and if you forgive me, a very Wilpon era style of thinking. One that you don't want to sort of get my fans equated with again. You don't want to get that sort of sense of like, oh yeah, these are players that we just need to keep in the lineup because we can't bring in anyone else, and it's a troubling way to think of your team, and it's a troubling way for the Met fans to think of their team. So, at some point, we're probably going to start to see some movement on those players. I also want to emphasize Miguel's performance in this game. We have seen very few starting pitching performances that have been quality starts this year for the Mets pitchers. It's very few. I don't know the exact number of quality starts that they have this year, but it's a slim number. I would even say it's possibly even in the single digits. That's pretty bad in terms of how poorly they've pitched this year. This was exactly what the Mets needed. Miguel didn't do anything really great and spectacular. He struck out 4 batters in 6 innings, but he limited one of the major's best offenses to 4 hits and 2 earned runs. He did it over 6 innings, and he did it with minimal sort of effort and issues. He just kind of let the Rays make outs, and the result of it all was, he did get hit for a home run, but there was nothing that he did particularly offensive in this game, and he came out of it looking really sharp and did everything they were supposed to, and then didn't make the bullpen have to come in earlier than they needed to. He just did what he was supposed to be doing, and it's one of those things that people look at Miguel and they're like, oh, he's like a pretty solid pitcher, and he has looked it at times, other times he has not. Consistency has been a critical thing with McGill. So his most important thing that he did in the start yesterday was not exacerbating the bullpen and doing everything that he was supposed to. He did his job, and it's been the hardest thing for the Mets pitchers to actually do this year has been doing their jobs. But he came out of it looking good. It was a great win. I've enjoying right now the Mets in these last 2 games more than I have in probably a month, which is really sad to say. But this is the best that they've looked in some time. It was their first series win in about a month as well. And it's been a troubling go of it for the Mets. I would hope that this is, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, some semblance of momentum. They're coming into a series now against the Cleveland Guardians, a series that's going to be similarly big for the Guardians. Guardians are also in a roughly the same record as the Mets do. They're 20-23. We are going to see the return of Carlos Carrasco in the start today, later tonight. Carrasco has looked terrible early on. We'll see if Carrasco can sort of bounce back and get his season going again. If not, then Carrasco has to be maybe considered one of the first stones to drop as well. But a big series. I don't know how well they're going to perform. They thankfully are going to stay home. I think that will help with keeping the momentum on check and not having any time off in between the series win. So you take on the American League's best team and you take 2 or 3 of them. You can feel now all of a sudden like, oh, we can play the Guardians. We can take them as well. And then they're going on the road again. They're going to have to play the Chicago Cubs and the Colorado Rockies after this. But let's stay in the present tense right now and focus on the Mets had a great series win. They're going to be coming up into another series where they can hopefully get themselves over 500 if they stay hot and keep their momentum going. So the hope is keep that momentum going. Thank you for listening to Mike's Mets Podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike's Mets Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.